Glad to see everybody here today. Welcome. My name is Lee Hoffar, current program director of the Herman P. and Sofia Talmadal Symposium Idea Studios. Oh, louder yet? Not loud enough? No, working a little louder in the shot. Now? Is it working? Yes, it's working. Okay. So this edition of the Herman B. and Sofia Talmadal Symposium Jewish Studies features the writer Ilana K. Parnell. Ilana has degrees from the universities in California, from UC Irvine and Davis, and is currently writer in residence at St. Maud, Minnesota's Hamline University, and where she does 2 residencies during the year, 12 days each. But her real career in life is as an author. And she's written a number of novels for young adults, for younger children, also down to picture books. Film art, for instance, today's book, The Blood Years, which won the Jewish Book Award in Young Adult Literature, the C.B. Taylor Book Award in Young Adult Literature, the Boston Globe-born Book Award for Fiction, and the California Book Award as Silver Medalist. Other novels that she's written include Red Good, Damsel, What Girls Are Made Of, and Into This. Significantly, in middle grade novels, from 2015 to 2024, she's written 5 works for younger readers yet, 6 works between 2019 and 24. So very prolific. Many of them award winners. If you search on the web, you'll find numerous interviews, video links, and podcasts around her work and her as an author. She's acclaimed, known for the diversity in her work, which, as I say, spans picture books, middle grade novels, and young adult fiction. Her writing often explores themes of identity, family, and resilience with a focus on complex and deeply human characters. Through her storytelling, she captivates readers with lyrical prose, thought-provoking narratives, making her a significant voice in contemporary children's and adult literature. The Blood Years, featured today, is the culmination of years of very careful research and painstaking revision. How is such a topic as one mere witness to a story of the past? How does a life weave together her inheritance of small, personal stories from a beloved grandmother, on the one hand, and on the other, the vast horror of history? Arnold will explore the responsibility and honor of telling this story, as well as illuminate her research and creative process. Afterwards, there was book signing, a purchase if you like. I'd like to thank the Federation for allowing us to use this room and supplying the staff about it. And I'm glad to welcome Ilana K. Arnold, who will explain very briefly, perhaps, why the K. She insists. Ilana.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's a lovely introduction. I appreciate it so much. I'll put this one here and just this. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. It is a beautiful day out there. So I know I'm competing with sun and the warm, so I appreciate you all coming out. So I am Ilana Kuczynski-Arnold. The K is Kuczynski, my name of origin. I insist on it because I don't have that much left of my family. So I'm honored to have your name. So Blood Years is the book I'll be speaking with you today about. I have some notes because some of the stuff I'm going to talk about sometimes makes me cry, and also because some of it is historical and I want to get the facts right, but I'm also going to speak more off the cuff in the second half of the talk. And I'm very excited to answer any questions you have about the art, the craft, or the business of writing. As Lee said, I have a number of books. 26 is the number as of now. Everything from future books to young adult novels published by mostly HarperCollins, also Random House, Simon & Schuster, Pilgrim Mifflin Harcourt, and others. So I know a lot about the business of writing, if anyone has any questions about that. So this is The Blood Years. It's not my first book, but it is my first work of historical fiction. And it's also more than that. It's what I've made of the stories my grandmother, who I called Nena, shared with me about being a Jewish teenager in Chernovitz, Romania during World War II and the Holocaust. Though Anna told me many things, and I knew there were stories to write, in order to craft a novel, I had to do deep research into the complex and unique history of her particular region. I had to learn other survivors' narratives. I read a ton of creative work produced by the survivors, scholarly works about the events that transpired in around Chernovitz, Romania, and much more. Imagine that someone gives you a precious plate and it shatters. Now imagine dropping that plate into the shards of 6 million shattered plates, some radically different from your plate and some nearly identical. Can you ever put the plate you were given together again? Most likely, no. But what you can do is sift gently and delicately and reverently through the shards, finding as many of the pieces as you can and collecting other sharp-edged, beautiful, terrible pieces as well. And then you could take all the pieces and sit with them for many years and then do your very best to make something with them. A mosaic. A piece of art that honors the original plate, even as it cannot be salvaged, and finds a way to make art from so many broken, priceless things. That's what writing this book felt like. It's my Nena, Frida, story, but it's not hers alone. It's also a tribute to other Chernovitzers who endured the Holocaust and the pogroms before, and to all those who perished. My grandmother, Rita Taylor, on the left. Her life revolved in many ways around her older sister, Astrid. So it's fitting that the blood years begins with the sisters too. In my novel, the main character is named Fredrika, and her older sister is named Astra. I'm going to read the first chapter to you now. Chapter 1 of part 1 is called Pigeons and Promises, and it's not very long. When we were very young, Astra and I made a pact. I was 6, Astra not quite 10. It was a sultry, miserable summer day. Father was missing, again. And Mama was in bed, still. Whenever Father disappeared, Mama disappeared too. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. Though it was nearly dusk, I was still wearing the nightgown I'd woken up in. I'd been wearing it for 3 days, as there was no one to make me change out of it. I remember how it stuck to my back like a second skin. Astra skulked around the kitchen, looking for something to eat. "Come on," she finally said, taking the last of the jams on the icebox, the last of the bread from the bread box, and heading to the stairwell. I followed her all the way to the roof of our apartment building. It was quiet up there. Still hot, but with a whisper of breeze, a promise that things would be better soon if we waited. We squatted side by side and took turns dipping hunks of bread into the jam jar. Down below and all around was Chernovitz, our city. I saw people moving about, horses pulling wagons, the occasional automobile. The colorful hats the ladies wore with just small scraps of color from up here. Far away was the green metal cap of the train station, as pretty as any of the ladies' hats. Father was out there, somewhere. "Do you think he's coming back?" I asked. Astra shrugged. "He always does." Yes, I wanted to say, but he'd never been gone this long. Long enough for the kitchen to grow entirely bare. Long enough for Mama to forget she had daughters. On the roof, pigeons landed, hopeful and hungry. "It's so stupid," Astra said, "how men come and go and women have to just sit around and wait for them." She pointed at me with a scrap of bread. It's tip blood bread with jam. "Listen, Rika," she said, "do me a favor, will you? Never, ever fall in love. Can just make a mess of things." I didn't really know what that meant, to fall in love. It didn't sound like something you did or didn't do on purpose. Not like climbing or jumping. Those were things you chose. Things you did. Falling, in my experience, was something that just happened, whether you liked it or not. And raised my shoulders, dropped. Astra turned to the city. "I'll tell you one thing, Rika, I'll never fall in love. And I'm never getting married. You can count on that." I believed her. My sister was the sort of person who did the thing she said she was going to do. She'd said she was going to be the youngest girl in her dance studio to go up on points, and she had been when she turned 9. She'd said she was going to read every book in the library, and she was working on it, devouring 3 or 4 books each week. If Astra said she wasn't going to get married, then that was that. It was good news to me. It meant that no one would come between us. If I could keep her, always. Around us, pigeons grew thicker, bobbing their heads and begging. I tore them a strip of thread. If you feed them, they'll only want more, Astra said, watching me. There are too many of them, they're too hungry. You'll never satisfy them all, so you might as well keep the bread and satisfy yourself. It was good advice. I nibbled at my piece of bread, avoided eye contact with the pigeons. Ultimately, though, I couldn't resist. When I thought Astra wasn't looking, I tossed them the last of my bread. 4 or 5 of them descended upon it, beating their wings and racing to eat it out. Of course, Astra saw. Sometimes my sister was cold with me, as far away as father and mama. Sometimes she was mean as a snake, calling me names and pinching me. I never knew who Astra would be on any given day, at any given moment. But sometimes, like this time, when she tore her remaining bread into 2 pieces and offered me one, Astra was the person who took care of me, who was there when everything else had gone wrong. Ignoring the pigeons, I shoved her bread gift into my mouth. I'm never getting married either, I promised. I'll never fall in love. And then we got up and we stomped our feet at the pigeons and waved our arms and yelled. And all of them, the great gray mass of them, startled and hopped and took flight. And Astra threw her arm around my shoulders and we laughed, loud as kids. I was thinking about pigeons when father returned the very next day. He even brought gifts, a bracelet for Mama, earrings for Astra, and a golden locket for me. Mama got out of bed. Her face, which had been slack for days, burst open like a shining star. She kissed his cheeks, his eyes, his mouth. She smoothed his mustache and brushed back the curl that fell across his brow, and she begged him not to leave him. He said what he always said. Stupid woman, of course I came back. I always come back, don't I? He made no mention of the bare cabinets, or dirty faces, the fact that it would resort to using newspaper for toilet tissue. Behind them, Astra looked at me as if to say, see what I mean? And though I didn't, not really, I nodded. This is what I did know. It was them, father and Mama, and us, Astra and me. Of course, father disappeared again, not a week later, and without leaving us a penny. Mama disappeared into her bed again, the food ran out again, and this time Astra went to a neighbor's door and asked them to call Mama's father, Howard Owa. When he arrived, Opal was dressed just as he always was, in spite of the heat. Wool trousers and a long jacket, a tall hat which he drew up to reveal his salt and pepper hair, his neat brown spill cap. Here he was to save us. My girl, he said. He hung up his hat and swung me into his arms. He carried me through our apartment, bare cupboards, the empty, mildewing icebox, dishes forgotten days old and beginning to mold, stacked in the kitchen sink. He peered into our parents' bedroom and shook his head at Mama, curled in a ball on father's side of the bed. Then he went into the room Astra and I shared. He put me down and went to my sister, who sat waiting on her bed with a book. He kissed her head and then said, girls, pack your things. A suitcase for each now. I'll return for the rest tomorrow. Come now, be quick about it, and we'll home in time for summer. Supper. My mouth flooded with saliva. I practically ran to the bureau to gather my clothes. Astra did too. Oba went to Mama. The walls were thin and we heard, Anna, enough with this. You and the girls will come home with me. Get up, pack a suitcase. Enough is enough. Her voice muffled as if her face was turned into a pillow. I need some money only to tide us over until Alfred comes home. Astra and I froze, fists full of clothing. I squeezed shut my eyes and silently begged, please. Please, I meant, please let us go to Opa's apartment where it was warm, where we didn't have to tiptoe past Mama's closed door, where his hired girl Milka would fix us something delicious. Nonsense. That one word sent Astra and me back in motion. You, I suppose, are a grown woman, Anna, and I can't make you come with me, but I won't leave the girls here. Half-starved, unwashed, you should be ashamed. There was a long pause, a silence, and Astra and I shared a glance. Finally, Mama spoke, and this time her voice was clear, it rang like a bell. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it means to have a husband who disappears, who gambles away our grocery money, who whores around. Enough. He was a louse when you marry him, and he's a louse still. I'll pack a bag and make it quick. Your daughters are hungry, and I'll see them fed before dark. And then Opa's shoes countered across the wooden floorboards, a firm click as he closed Mama's bedroom door. A moment later, his head peered into our room, and when he spoke, his tone was gentle. "Are you chickens almost ready?" When we left the flat 10 minutes later, it was alongside Mama, whose eyes were puffy and red, but who had combed her hair. That night, after a good dinner and a good bath, Astra washed my hair for me. She and I were tucked into bed. It was incredible, I thought, how quickly things could change. How we could go from unwashed and hungry to clean and full with just Opa's knock on our door. Just with Astra deciding to make it happen. They were the two I could count on. Astra and Opa. I heard the even, deep breaths that meant Astra had fallen to sleep. I saw Opa's shadow as he looked in to make sure we were safe and sound. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and whispered my promise again. I won't fall in love. I will ever get married. And I added, whispering even more brightly, just to myself, I'm never leaving Opa's apartment. Never, ever again. So I should not pull first chapter, but I'll stop here. It's not reading from one guy. But the name of the first four is Astra and her lover. So you can see how well that promise played out. Okay. So, I obviously heard that both of my grandparents had survived the Holocaust, my grandfather in Poland and my grandmother in Romania. Here I am with them, celebrated my college graduation. They met and married after the war. I learned about concentration camps in school, and when I asked my Anna if she'd been in prison, she said, not exactly. What I didn't understand for many years was that the experience of Jews and Roma and disabled and gay people in Romania was different from the stories made possible in American literature, media, and history books. There were no concentration camps in Romania, but that absolutely didn't mean that there was no Holocaust. Instead, there was a systemic, slow erasure of Jewish rights and protections that began before the war and amplified throughout, resulting in the Jewish residents losing their status as citizens, their right to do business, the corralling of Jewish population into inhumanely small and unsanitary ghetto, and waves of brutal deportations and murders. The war years in Chernovitz, Romania, and the fate of this Jewish population have not been extensively written about. While it should be common knowledge that Romania is the country that killed the most Jews of any other country except Nazi Germany. Even before the war, there was a long history of Romanian anti-Semitism and violent attacks on Jews. And during World War II, over 400,000 Jews were murdered in Romanian-controlled areas. And Romania has not done the work of acknowledging and remembering its terrible history. In fact, during communism, the Romanian government blocked access to and even destroyed archival material and deflected all blame onto Nazi Germany. It was only after the fall of communism that archives were slowly opened and remaining artifacts started to be accessed. This process is still ongoing, and those people are unfamiliar still with the history in this region and the extent of the atrocities. Here's a map of the region before the war, so Chernovitz was still part of Romania. So you can see her area, Bukovina, there in Romania, Ukraine, and got Slovakia, Hungary, right there. And here's a more current map. The dot there is where her city is now, Samto Chernovitzy, and it's Ukraine. So this is the basics of what happened. After World War I and the collapse of Austria-Hungary, the area around Chernovitz, called Northern Bukovina, was awarded to Romania. At the time, ethnic Romanians made up only a quarter of Chernovitz's 112,000 people. Jews constituted the biggest group, at least 27% of the population of raised in the 1930 census, and the city was considered to be a relatively safe haven. Other large groups in the city included Germans, Ukrainians, and Poles. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the Soviet Union used the invasion as a pretext to occupy northern Bukovina, including Chernovitz. Then, in 1940, Romania joined forces with Hitler. When the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in June of 1941, the Nazis and their Romanian allies quickly overrun northern Bukovina and Chernovitz. The Germans arrived at the city in early July that year and transferred control of the area back to Romania. And then the Romanians generally bent over backwards to carry out the anti-Jewish policies of their German allies. They stripped Jewish citizens of rights and property, The 50,000 Jewish residents, including my family, were forced to move into a sales ghetto. Many residents died in inhumane conditions inside the ghetto, and waves of Jewish prisoners were transferred from the ghetto to extermination camps, mostly to Transnistria. It's across the river. Thousands died en route, and those who survived were mostly just left to die of starvation, weather, and disease. Here's the sort of brief history of Chernovitz that I kind of told you about now. It wasn't until after I published my first novel that Nena filled some of the gaps in my history and the war story that I'd heard. And hearing what she finally shared, I understood why. When I was young, she edited out the worst things to spare me from them. She'd shared stories about her family life that are in this book. Going to the countryside for a summer where she was chased by geese. Her mead as a snake, but incredible older sister Ostrid. Their attendance at the ballet academy and the relationships made there. Closer to the end of her life, she trusted you with much more of it. The complex relationships between her mother and father, her sister and her lover, herself and a man who both provided for and abused her, and what happened to her beloved grandfather. But I'll bet, knowing her, even then she held back some of her most painful remembrances as an act of love. And she hoped that someday I would use her experiences in a book. Just name the character Fredrika, she told me, and all the slights that name. This is a photo of my great-grandmother, Anna, my great-aunt Ostrid, and my grandmother, Frida. This is my great-great-grandfather, Heinrich Fishman, Anna's father, and my Nana's Hulda. These 4 people are the models for the main characters and the Bleikers. So my Nana's stories, personal stories, are one arc in the story. But I wrote a novel, because, novel means not necessarily all facts. So her stories are all in there. But I also did extensive research, and I'm going to share some of the research I did. Maybe some of you are interested in telling a story of your own and wondering, how do you tell a real story in a fictional way? One of the main resources I used was the archives at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I listened to hours and hours and hours of testimonials from survivors in Chernovitz specifically, as well as people in other areas of Eastern Europe. Some of the scenes in this book, there's a scene where all the men are taken from their houses and led kind of like they don't know where they're going. Some of them don't come back. That didn't happen to my grandparents, but it absolutely happened in Chernovitz to other Chernovitzers. And so I have it happening to her family because I wrote a novel, but the facts of how it happened or real was really essentially important to me, not to create or make up any atrocities. Even though my book is fiction, I didn't want to sensationalize something that was already so terrible. So unfortunately, everything you read in this book that is terrible is true. The book is deeply researched. This is a book that I found. It's called The Ideal Marriage. It's a book, How to Have a Happy Sex Life book, that, some of the women in her time would have read. And I found this book and sort of translated it sort of page by page and included it as a book that Astra and her friend are reading and discussing as they're entering their first sexual relationships. I read as many primary sources as I could. I read a ton of books by other Chernovitzers, who some of them were, well-known authors in their own right later in life. Rose Hoslander, Paul Celan are probably 2 of the most well-known Chernovitz writers. The Walnut Tree by Martha Loom is a novel based on her childhood years in Chernovitz. And so when you read other things that were written by people who actually lived there, you learn all kinds of really specific details that you can't get from history books, although I read a ton of those too. Like how many stories tall was an apartment building in Chernovitz? And, did they have, basic things that I take for granted here? Like, do they have plumbing? And then, yes, they did, out of the countryside. So reading a lot of these fictional or these nonfiction books and these first-person books filled in a lot of the gaps for me. This next book I read, this is called The Third Reich of Dreams. This is a book that was, it was a German Jewish young woman named Charlotte Berat who, realized that her people were having a lot of really specific nightmares during the early years of, of the Third Reich. And she decided to write them down. And so she collected people's dreams that they were having, and then she smuggled them out of the country. And many years later, they were collected to a book that later even got translated into English. It has a essay by Bruno Bellin. It's a really phenomenally interesting book. And every dream that my character has is based on a dream that one of these real people would have had or did have. So as far as how specific was my research, unfortunately, don't have to make anything up. My job, I felt, was more to be a mosaic maker, to take things from all kinds of different places and then look for the pattern that I could make out of them in a new way. One of the most important things I did, probably the most important thing I did other than listening to my Nana, was I found a surviving Chernowitzer. Her name is Ruth Lasford Gold. She lives in Florida now. So after I wrote my first draft, and I read all these books, like I said, one of the things I did was I read a ton of memoirs that were not like bestsellers. They were either self-published or they're published by a small university press. And hers was one of those, was published by a small university press. It's called Ruth's Journey. She's about 5 years younger than my Nana, and a different sort of story. She was taken to Transnistria, which was across the river. My grandmother didn't get taken then. But she was the closest living human I could find who had new aspects. And so I wrote to her after I read her book, and her wonderful cookbook, where she describes all sorts of things that I remember my Nana making, and asked her if she would be willing to have a phone call with me. And what was really interesting is when she answered the phone and she said hello to me, what I hadn't realized is that my Nana's accent was very specific. German was her language of origin, even though she lived in Romania. Her family spoke German at home. She spoke some Hebrew. They spoke Yiddish. She had to speak Romanian in school and on streets. Then Russia came and she had to learn Russian like that. Then Russia left and the Germans came back. She also spoke some Ruthenian, which is the peasants' language. My Nana had a very specific accent that I didn't realize was different until I heard it come out of Ruth's mouth. And it was like my grandmother had died already. And when I heard Ruth speaking to me in my Nana's accent, it was like a gift I hadn't even known I lost was given back to me. It was pretty amazing. Ruth was game for reading my book, which is pretty generous. And I gave her, of course. She also paid people for their work. And she gave me all kinds of wonderful specific feedback, like, what do you mean it's a 6-story building? There are just 6-story apartment houses in China. That's nothing more than 4. What are you doing? Are you crazy? She was very funny and wonderful, and read many versions of my story and has become a dear friend of mine. So primary sources, when you can get them, it's obviously harder if you're writing about World War II to find these very important primary source people, and to find someone like Ruth who was so willing. When she finished my final book, she told me that it was, just like being Gatti in Chernovitz, which made me feel both very proud as an author and also a great deal of pain as a human to think that I put her back into that place. So yeah, the research was complicated and ongoing. The book took over 10 years. Although it came out, in 2023, we started writing it in my head originally in about 2012, 2013, when my first book came out. Originally, I thought I was going to tell it as, a futuristic dystopian in which the Holocaust had come again, because I thought I could get away with doing all this deep historical research. How I just made it futuristic, like Hunger Games. But then things in our world shifted, and it became very clearly around 2016, 2017 that the book needed to actually be historical fiction. When I traveled to talk about this book with younger people, I was in Richmond, Virginia, about October 15th of 2023. Big group of teens. Believe I was probably the only Jew in the room. And I started talking about my book and when it was said, and I had all these blank faces staring at me. And I said, wait a second, let's just back up. And then how many of you have heard of the Holocaust? And, it it was maybe 100 kids in the room, and I'd say maybe about 10 hands went up. These are, 7th through 11th graders. And then I said, well, anyone heard of Adolf Hitler? And a few more hands came up. And I thought to myself, said to them, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to break some really terrible news to you right now about this thing that happened. And I told them about the Holocaust, all the while wondering if I was going to get in trouble for, making them have a difficult day. Something else I've been going through as an author over the last several years is I've been sort of named over and over and over again as a banned author. My books have been taken from schools and libraries across the country. In Utah, 2 of my books, Damsel and What Girls Were Made Of, have been named as pornographic. And if a student, say a 17-year-old student or an 18-year-old student, brings a copy of one of my books to campus, they can be punished for having it on campus. This is, closer to home than you might think. In Huntington Beach, which is a city right next to mine, we're facing just terrible waves of book banning and threats of privatization of the library. So, personally, I always felt like it's never a good thing for Jews when our names start getting put on lists. So I'm not a big fan of seeing my names on all of these lists. But I had this group of kids and I told them about the Holocaust, and this really nice, white kid in the back row raised his hand and said, excuse me, would Hitler, would he have wanted to kill me too? I was like, oh, I'm so sorry to say this to you, you beautiful young man. But yes, many of us are in this together. So it has been a real, eye-opening experience to travel around some and talk about this book and realize how much the real story of what happened is not even forgotten, just completely unlearned. And so I'm very grateful to myself that I decided to write this as historical fiction and not as a dystopian novel instead. So The Blood Years is the story of my grandmother. And it's also a love story about sisters. It's about ballet and bears and the way our families can fail us. I think it's a book about the great and terrible things people do in the name of love. And it's my attempt to do with my Nena's gift of stories, to do what I try to do with all of my young adult work, to transform pain into art, to embrace ambiguity, and to find beauty even in the ugliest of moments. How are you doing on time? Do you have time? Okay. I see you're watching that. I'm going to read you just a couple more pages so you can see why it's named The Blood Years, and then I'm going to take your questions. So, this is, from, just about that far into the book. Frederica has begun her period, and no one has told her what was going to happen to her, so she thinks she's bleeding to death. She goes to ballet like she does every day, and her sister and, her sister's friend Ruth explain the bare minimum to her and give her some rags and a shirt to put around the waist for the rest of class. Okay. When class is over and the girls are filing toward the dressing room, as Conrad stacks his music into a folder, Madame Lucia says, Frederica, stay for a moment. I've been a student at Madame Lucia's dance school for 5 years. Never has she spoken to me other than to correct my form, and usually she does that with her stick rather than her voice. She waits until the room is cleared. I stand straight as if in class, clenching my backside, feet turned out in first position out of habit. She walks toward me, tapping her stick on the ground with each velvet step. Tap, tap, tap. Up close, I see how her face powder sinks into the wavy lines across her forehead, the curved lines around her mouth. Though I'm not particularly tall, I loom over Madame Lucia. How can such a small woman take up so much space? I take it your mother could not be bothered to explain the functions of womanhood to you? And blink. No, Madame Lucia. I have very little patience for women like that. Whom does she have patience for, I wonder? Do you know why women bleed, Frederica? I clear my throat. Ruth says it has to do with making babies, but I can't see what one has to do with the other. She taps her stick again. Being a woman is bloody business. There's blood each month for many years. Some dancers find they can stop its flow if they stay very thin. She shrugs as if to say she has no opinion of that one way or another. If you lie with a man, there will be blood. If you give birth to a child, blood. You'll curse the blood most of the time, except for those times when you're awaiting it desperately, when it's the only thing you want to see. I stand motionless. I can't imagine why anyone would possibly wish for this. Madame Lucia looks at me shrewdly. Tell me, Frederica, your sister says she wishes to be prima. We shall see. Lately it seems she's had other things on her mind. She has the talent, of course, but not the temperament. You, well, we both know you don't have your talent, yes. This stings, but it's also a relief to hear someone speak so frankly. I nod. Good. Madame Lucia raps the floor hard as if to punctuate the word. So then I will ask you this question, as it seems your mother doesn't have the constitution for such conversations, and Astra seems to live half in a world of her own making. What is it that you want to do with your life? Now that you've had your blood, it's time for you to start thinking about what you want, what you might choose to pursue. Mind you, she warns, it's unlikely you will get what you want, regardless. Most women don't. But I think it's better to have an idea. So, you've not dancing, then what will it be? You talented student. I'm not. Astra is the brilliant one, though she's fiercely lazy. I shake my head. A homemaker then? Would you like to have a husband? Children? I think of Mama pulling Astra and me through the dark night streets, calling for our father, begging strange men to find him for her. I remember our will do to icebox, our empty stomachs. I can think of nothing I want less than that. Even though Astra's broken our vow, I have no desire to do the same. No husband, no children. All right, now what you don't want is a good start. But tell me, Frederica, what is it you do want? I knew the answer as soon as she asked the question the first time. I want to join Oba Edi's shop. I want to see my name etched in glass beneath his. It's not an ambition like dancing prima is or becoming a doctor or even raising children. It's a small thing, to work with Oba, selling and repairing jewelry. To open up the backs of watches and find what's broken and set things to right. To be together. It's all I want. This small thing. That and for my sister to forgive me. I almost tell Madame Lucia about the shop, but I see Astria's expression when she shoves her pointed finger in my face and I hear the words, I'm done with you. Those words make me feel a little death inside me. I focus on the space between my feet to the whirls of gray and brown along each thin finger of wood. A tear slides down the bridge of my nose and falls like a raindrop to the floor. Madame Lucia is disappointed. Still lost. She taps her stick again, this time more lightly. Well, the future is uncertain for everyone, these days more than ever. Still, there are only two ways to go, Frederica, in dance and in life. You choose your path, or it chooses you. I don't know why, but after she says that about paths and choosing, Madame Lucia's face drops, and her gaze drifts off. Just for a moment, she looks very old and very tired. And the first time, I wonder how Madame Lucia, with her thick French accent, ended up here in Chernowitz sharing an apartment with a Jewish milliner teaching a bunch of girls to dance. What had her path been? What had she wanted it to be, and how close is what she has now? Then her gaze snaps back into focus, sharp as ever, and seeing me surveying her, she frowns. All right, hurry along now. I drop a small curtsy and turn to go. Just as I reach the dressing room door, Madame Lucia calls to me. Frederica, welcome to the Blood Years. Before I take your questions, I would like to share one more picture of my wonderful Nana, as I am her best, full of delightful treats and a smile for me always. She was my benefactress in every way a person can be like someone else. I would love to answer any questions you have. Yes.
So just a footnote. Charlotte Barat's Third Reich Dreams has been how print.
Yes, it's coming back. It's right now.
It's coming back.
Yes.
Right against spot.
Yes. I found a copy of it at UC Davis in the library there. And my sister, who works for UC Davis, took it for me and did the terrible thing of Xeroxing the entire thing and sending it to me. So I was very lucky to get to read it.
So it's receiving renewed interest.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I was interested in that. My real question is,
Every great writer is inspired by another great writer. So who would you say is your inspiration in the area of writing historical novels?
Honestly, I can say that it's my grandmother. So this is what I'm saying to you. She wasn't a writer, but she was great. She was a linguist, and she was an excellent storyteller. And she did a couple of things that I would highly encourage everyone to do with the younger people in their life. First of all, she had a whole library house full of books, and there were absolutely no goals about what I could or should read. There were no limitations. I found everything you ever wanted to know about sex, but were afraid to ask. Right there with some Agatha Christie novels. Right there with a copy of Mein Kampf. All of it mixed together in this great muddle of original fairy tales. And she would bring me these little trays of fruit. And she knew my work as a child was to read. And she would just be delighted to see me reading. And she would never tell me I shouldn't be reading something, which is one of the things I think made me a writer. The other thing that she did was that she told me stories about her life, and not just the stories that made her seem like a hero. I have a wonderful grandfather too. He was Polish, a survivor of, Holocaust also, and a big important figure in my life, but I don't have a book to tell about him because my papa would only tell me the stories where he came out as the hero. And he'll only have 5 or 6 stories that he wanted to tell, and he'd tell them over and over and over again. Whereas my Nana would tell me she was a noticer of everything. So she would tell me stories about her own life, but also about Ruth, this girl who went to the dance studio with her, whose story is in this book as well. She'd tell me stories about her sister and her first husband, who was doctor. She was telling me about her father, who abandoned the family to go to Transnistria with another lover and her children. Like these things that became sort of the greater arc of my book. So if you, like we all do, want your stories to stay and to be passed down, strongly recommend you do what my grandmother did and leave your ego behind and tell all the stories about yourself, the ones that make you seem like a fool as well as the that make you seem like a hero. So, I read voraciously. Rudis Pettis is another, author who writes historical fiction, whose work I admire very much. But I would say more than anything else, my willingness to take on the story is due to the fact that my grandmother always made me feel important, and that she never told me that something wasn't for me. Yeah.
So how old were you when she died?
She died 8 years ago, which making 42. I'm 50. I was, what was your question?
Outside the time of her death,
I was 42.
Oh, so you really had time to absorb it.
Yeah, I heard her story over and over and over again. Many stories. And she was interesting as she would tell them to me in such interesting period specific ways. Her earlier stories to me were kind of funny and light. And oh yes, terrible things happened too. But we also did these wonderful funny things, like go to the countryside, and she was chased by a goose, and some of my very favorite stories that she used to tell me. And stories about ballet. But as I got older, she would cycle back through the same stories. The other thing I loved in my Nana is that she would answer any question, but only the question I asked. So I would say something, like she would tell about a man in her life who's featured in this book who was both a savior and a rapist in her life. And when I would ask a question, she would answer it, but then she'd wait for the follow-up question. She wouldn't give me all the information. She would only answer the specific question, but leave the door open for me to ask the next question I was ready, which I think is a great way for handling difficult topics for young people, is never to lie or tell them that they're not old enough to know. I believe that ignorance doesn't protect children, but I think waiting for them, if we have to ask the follow-up question, allows them to deal with difficult topics, sort of piece by piece at a pace they're willing, able to hear it.
I would expect that the stories came Gloria because she had a good audience. She had someone who, at a young age, apparently you had some sense of how important the eyes should take in.
She was great storyteller. And she was a grown-up who talked to me like I was a whole person already. And who doesn't want to listen to someone talk to them when they're treated like an equal, treated like a whole person. So yeah, she was my most important person. Like I said before, like no one gets everything. But I got an excellent grandmother.
But I think for so many people, they don't really get it, how important it is to get the histories, whether of the Holocaust or any other, and that most people just don't think of their grandparents' stories at an early age and not being significant or worth remembering or paying attention to.
Yeah.
So,
but she was just my very favorite person. So anything she had to say to me was gold. I'm very grateful that my kids got to know her as well as they did too. Yeah. So, but yeah, she was great.
Oh, so you were talking about how you, I guess, spoke to a class of
Yeah.
and they didn't know you had history.
They were, I mean, we didn't think a Holocaust, maybe they were learning about World War II in 11th grade, and I was seeing them before they got there, is my best sort of interpretation, you know?
Like what?
Yeah.
What age were they? Where did it happen?
It was in Richmond, Virginia, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and it was,
Grade 9.
I think they were like 8th through 9th, 8th through 10th. It was a book festival. So there were kids from all different schools coming in, and I was just talking to them about my book. But yeah, I was very surprised.
Now.
Yeah, I'm less surprised now.
Yeah, yes, they don't. History is just being. They just make based up hours. Kids are being brainwashed. That's an unfortunate. Busy. Like, I was looking at a curriculum for my first grade or kindergarten, and it was saying it already started out saying bad things about Israel, like Israel's stolen land or not true at all, and so they're propagating kids. I think. Question back.
Thank you. Following up on that question, in light of the explosions in Holocaust denial, and through all these varied forms of media, I've been involved in worrying about Holocaust denial for about 40 years.
Yeah.
Back when it was, some wingnuts and torrents that were publishing falsehoods. And of course now, and I too have a child of 2 survivors, so it's extremely painful and terrifying, really, to figure out how to deal with it. And so my question to you is, given that everything is fictionalized, do you worry about writing a book of fiction about this subject? And if you do at all, then how could things be presented so that your work doesn't feed into
Right.
the denial?
So my book, if you pick up a copy, you'll see it has extended author's note at the beginning that frames, it has an historical history of what actually happened in Chernovitz. It has a forward, and then it has the extensive author's note at the end that talks about the research I did and what the book is, historically and fictional. It also has a long reading list of all of the books and resources that I reference so that people could do their own history. I don't worry about writing fiction about history because we have always written fiction about, that's what fiction writers do, is we create, stories out of, but I did take a special response, and I always do a huge amount of research because this book was it's such a fraught and important time. It was very important to me not to sensationalize real tragedy. I refused to make up anything to happen to my characters that wasn't real. There's like conversations with friends that shouldn't really have, but as far as like any historical movement or invasion or even personal atrocity, like rape or suicide, those are all, unfortunately, historically accurate. Sometimes I hear from people, it's interesting, myself, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and I hear from people like, people who use rape as a plot, as a plot point. It's like, that's so tired, and I get very angry because I kind of feel like the world fills us up with all sorts of things. Some are good and some are bad. And then to be told that those of us who live through, or the survivors who live through these things, are then not supposed to make art out of those things is another level of silencing. So I actually feel really empowered by the fact that I took these stories that my grandmother gave me as a legacy, and I did with them what I can do. I'm not a historian, I'm a novelist. So, I think I did excellent work, and I'm very proud of it.
What you and I really appreciate a response at the fact that you included all of that in the book.
I want them to have the context, any reader. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.
No, I'm very inspired to read your book. I wasn't at all familiar with
Yeah, for sale, get yourself some fun. You local independent bookstore.
See, I also saw it's on Hoopla, so thank you too, because that's free for people, but I'll.
Is that a library?
Yeah, for the online library.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I get paid when people check my books out of libraries too. It's so
Yeah,
yes,
you do.
as long as
Okay.
you don't download it legally, I'm all free to book. I'll be careful with it. I'm all for it.
so after I listen to this one, because I usually listen.
Yeah.
What's your next book you recommend I read?
Oh gosh, it depends on what you like about this book. If you like, I read a bunch of different things. Probably like my young adult fiction is read about 50% by teens and 50% by adults. And I have a variety of things. Red Hood and Damsel were the two books I wrote for this book, and each of those is sort of a feminist retelling of a fairy tale. Red Hood is about a girl who finds that when she gets her period for the first time in sync with the full moon comes the ability to fight werewolves who also sync with the full moon. And it deals with questions around incels. You know what incels are? Yes, unfortunately everyone does now. Not everyone, but everyone coalition. Involuntary celibates for very angry young men that feel entitled to certain things. And the book for that was called Damsel, and it's a dragon fairy tale of a sort. If you like more sort of contemporary literary fiction, you might like What Girls Were Made Of, which was a National Book Award finalist a few years ago. It's a book about, under what conditions is a girl worthy of love? And I have another book that's in part historical fiction that's coming out next year. It's a portal fantasy. It's set 2021, just after COVID. A girl whose mother has died because she's a vaccine denier. And the main character, her name's Maura, is autistic, and her mother didn't want her to get the COVID vaccine because she was afraid of the MMR vaccine. It's very sorry how timely my story has become. And she accidentally travels to 1945 France. And so, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's coming out next year. It's called Hololight.
And yeah.
Well, the book that I want to read next is the one that tells what happened right after Busy.
Yeah, I burned that book, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So there's a photograph that indicates that Astrid also survived.
Yes.
But that's the only information I have, and I'd love to read a sequel.
I have heard anyone yet. No, yes.
Going to?
I would very much like to. Yeah, I have, there's at least another Cole novel in the years before my grandparents met and immigrated to the States. So, yes, maybe I will write a story.
I also just wanted to mention last July I flew into Richmond for a conference, and on the train from the airport to up the city, I saw the side of a building with the anti-Semitic slur written on it, and I was pretty shocked. Do you see that?
In Huntington Beach, where I led right before I went to Long Beach again, I saw anti-Semitic slurs and tags on my leisure walk. So, yeah, most of all was free. Yeah, Richmond, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit talking about your creative process, but could you share more about it now?
Yeah. Well, writing historical fiction was interesting because this time I had the whole plot. I knew where the story was going to start, and I knew that the story where it was going to end because I knew it was going to be your teen years with remembering of her childhood years. So I had that, and I knew the basic sort of tentpole events for life that were going to figure in, and then the job was sort of figure out what the sort of creative arc was and what I needed to fill in with other survivor stories and historical research and a number of things. Finding this character's voice was the hardest thing I've ever done. That scene I just read to you from the very beginning didn't exist from the first 5 drafts of the novel. Her and sister, and their little, talk about love. Because I had my grandmother's voice in my head, telling me the stories, and she did it with this sort of humor and cushion. And I knew she was fine, right? We were sitting at our kitchen table and she was 60 and we were having tea and cookies. And she was telling me about, the Russians coming to town and then stealing her watch off her arm, but I knew she was okay so I was telling the story in this very muffled way. And it wasn't honestly till after my grandmother died that I was able to tell the story and make my character not my grandmother, but a version of her that I could sort of watch suffer. So there's a huge amount of revision in this book, more than I've ever had, even though I knew the main events in the story. Usually when I sit down to write a book, I have an idea, either for a character, a setting, or a plot. I know one of those 3 things, and that's enough to get me going. And as I keep going, I sort of figure out what's going to happen next or where it's going to happen. I never really, except for this book, know the whole thing. And And that has its own challenges too. It means that, since I don't really own the plot first, I'm discovering things as I go. Usually what I do is I keep like a running list as I start to figure out more. I keep a running list of what I've done so far and I sort of create an outline as I write. So that by the time I finish it, I have like an outline of the first draft. But I also have another document where I keep ideas for things that might happen later in the book. Oh, this could happen there in chapter 17, or ish, about that point in the book. So it's a lot of sort of like, there's this great quote. I forget who said it first. Maybe someone in the audience knows. You can make it all the way down a mountain at night, driving, seeing no farther than your headlights, 30 feet. But you can make it all the way down the mountain, seeing just 30 feet at a time. And so that's one of my main sort of beliefs as a writer is I don't see the whole story. If I can just sort of put my blinders on and just focus on the thing right in front of me, the next stuff will be revealed. One of my best things that has happened to me as I've gotten to be more experienced, one of the best reasons I think anyone should finish a novel, either if it's not good, like don't keep revising the first 50 pages, get to the end, because two things happen. One is you have proof of concept. You now know you can finish a novel, which will give you great confidence in the next time. Even if it won't be good, at least you know you get to the end because you've done it before. The other things that it does is that when you get to the novel, it's the end of the novel, then you can see what it is you've made. And then you could try to revise it to make it a better version of what it's trying to be. But for many years as a younger writer, I would start things and then I would get to a certain point, I would feel like I was lost and that meant I failed. And I would go back to the beginning and try again, or I would give up and try another project. But ultimately, I did come to this realization that you have to finish books in order to be a novelist. Otherwise, you're just a beginning writer. You're writing a writer of beginnings, not of the whole thing. And oftentimes what's interesting to me is that writers ending up spend years and years sort of perfecting the first 50 pages of their novel. If they ever do get to the end, they realize they don't even need those first 50 pages. That's actually not true beginning of the story. I like to say that they just spent many years petting a dead cat. You don't really want to find out Payne is spending all these years, like, caressing this dead cat, right? So don't spend forever on the beginning. Get to the end, and then you're able to take a step back and say, what is it that I actually made? And then how do I make it more what it wants to be already? Not, oh, that's not what I wanted to make. How do I make it the thing I thought I wanted? So it's not like raising children. When you have kids, maybe we thought you were going to have a doctor. But it turns out you have a pianist. You don't say, hopefully you don't say, no, you're going to be a doctor because I knew you were going to be a doctor. You say, oh, you're actually a pianist. Let me help you to be the best pianist you can be. That's how novel writing is. I wish someone had told me that. Revision is about taking a step back and saying, what do I actually make? Not what did I try to make? Try to make something funny, when you were trying to. And then you say, how do I help it to be more the thing it wants to be? And push it more clearly in the direction of where it wants to go. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. I'm very blessed to be invited by you.
And I just want to share with you really quick thing, a quote that was shared with me hours ago. My friend is this camera look at it. So whether he watched a good book store and the top words said, any book worth banning is a book worth reading.
I agree. But unfortunately, the problem is that most books that get banned just quietly disappear. I totally agree with that. I love banned book weeks and I love all that. But for most of us, it kind of just means that the book has sort of disappeared off the shelf and it never gets found by unreaders. So, it's really scary. I agree with that. And I love Amherst as well.
But, and my question is, maybe I missed it. Did you actually go back to Short Hits?
No, I wanted to go, but it was COVID and the Ukraine war. And it's now Ukraine and I just couldn't go. For my next book, which is set in France, so I did. Thanks, France. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened to your grandparents and their families during the Holocaust?
Well, I don't want to kind of spoil the plot of Blood here, so I don't want to tell you too much about my grandparents' family, except that, my grandmother and her sister lived, which, as you can tell, it's one here, and see pictures of them. Most of the rest of her family didn't. I can tell you that I don't have extended family. I had my grandmother, my grandfather, and my Nana's mother. So she lives too. But, nobody else. We had a very small family. Almost everyone else on both sides died. My grandfather was from Warsaw, and both his parents were taken away. His grandfather, who actually I put him and his brother in this book a little bit too. You read the books, you recognize there's a family in the ghetto with them that has a father And the kids are yeah, those are my yeah, they go away. And then there's another character who's an amputee who's lost this part of his leg, then a street cracks. That happened to my grandfather's father between the wars. And so he was one of the first people taken because anybody with a disability was taken, and his mother went with her. So yeah, they didn't survive either. But
And Conrad didn't do that.
Conrad is an amalgam of yes. So I shouldn't say it's too much as to Conrad, but yeah, yeah. So there was a lot of in the book. Yeah. I'm curious about logistics, because I'm writing dissertations. That's where my mind is. Yeah. What kind of programs or systems or apps what do you use? I am such a disorganized writer. I could show you. I have like 15. The Blood Gears version 1, the Blood Gears version 2. I've got just mostly I write in Word. I don't do Scrivener, although I've tried it. I have lists of I have folders full of miscellaneous research and interviews with this person. And I tend to try to write a draft in a period of time that allows me. My biggest trouble as a writer is trying to see the whole thing in one piece after I've finished it, trying to hold the whole thing in my head. So I will read my own book over and over and over hundreds of times in order to try to keep the whole thing in my head. And I will do a series of passes. Like this time I'm just going to look for friendship and how friendship works in this book. And I will go through the draft paying attention to the best friend and the best friend's older brother and Ostrad's old best friend to Ostrad's best friend. And I'll make all my changes just to that. And I'll notice other problems and I'll make a list of what other, passes and what to make. And so I go over the book over and over and over again in a series of passes, always the constant other list of other things that I know I'm going to need to fix. And then my editor gets involved and he sends me his, 18-page single-space letter of all the things he thinks that I need to fix. And I'll take that and I'll turn it into a bullet point list. And I'll go through his notes and decide what I'm going to do with that. So I'm probably not the best. I mean, I'm happy to show you my files, Heppers. They're really embarrassing. It's a mess. I don't know how I kept it all straight, but I appreciate hearing that. But, most of the writers I know, actually, who are published, have very similar systems to me. We're all us. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask another question about this phenomenon that you mentioned about telling the story over and over again? And is it really the case that every time your grandmother told you the story, that it was the same story?
Probably not. No, I think oftentimes, they got deeper and deeper and longer. So when she told me the story the first time through about going to the countryside with her sister and her grandfather to, this Romanian, this Fenian family, countryside family for the summer, I didn't understand that it was because the father had left again and that the family had been abandoned. I didn't understand that the people they stayed with were anti-Semitic, and that they were renting Nurgle. I didn't understand that the grandfather was kosher, was sort of breaking his own rules in order to give this gift of this trip. So these details got given to me. Again, as the story got told over and over again, and I got older, she told me sort of more complex versions of the same stories.
Yeah, that's a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
That as the person trusts you or the story becomes more expansive.
For sure. And then I became older. I became a person who was ready to hear that story, the other story, a deeper story.
People, Frederick Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies. And everyone says, why did he write 3 autobiographies? And the easy answer is, that some people say is that, he needed to make money. So he wrote autobiographies or he republished his speeches. But it's not the case. Actually, Douglass's in each autobiography expanding his understanding of what the nature of slavery was.
Yeah. And the world was moving forward too, just like I was getting older. His audience was changing and maybe was able to discern, more complicated, complex versions. You and then you and then you. Yes.
It as a writer, so I'm in awe about the amount of work that you put in the research and going through just searching for things. I mean, that like makes me feel like I should start all over again.
I again, lighters on, and just do the one task at hand, and then do it again and again and again and again and again, each time from a slightly different facet. It's like, look, you got to cut diamonds, like
We do that. I go that.
yeah, different angle every time.
But I love when he said one character is a malleable.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're going to write historical fiction, that gives you the ability to combine character traits and to cut people out entirely that don't fit. So the main thing is I realized this was a book about the great and terrible things people do in the name of love. So when it came to deciding which stories stayed, I sort of held them up to that. Like when you go to the eye doctor, like this, so that's, like, does this story, is this a facet of the big story, the great and terrible things people do in the name of love? And if it did, then it found a place in the book. And if it didn't, then it didn't make it into the book. It's a lot of hard cuts. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any research advice for stories that like extracting material when the people are not alive anymore? So I'm also from a Superior family. There's certain things I know, but I think my dad and my aunt grew up really with the culture and not honor stuff.
Yeah.
But I also think they know more than they can know.
Are they still around?
Yes. But one of my aunts is getting old.
Yeah.
Wanted to sit down with her. But when you don't necessarily know what you're looking for at this point, how do you, and what other kinds of material? Obviously, there's other like material that you use, other books and stuff like that. But if you're working with your family material, how do you approach that when you don't exactly know what it will turn into? I write fiction and write fiction. And also when you don't really know what you're looking for, per se.
So the first thing I have to do is let go of the idea that you're looking to extract any specific sort of information, because then you might find you're disappointed and then you're not really listening to what's being given. So I will instead encourage you to ask very specific, concrete questions about little things. Like, tell me about the house you grew up in. And well, what do you mean? What do you mean? What's the upstairs bedroom like? Wait, did you share your bedroom? Well, how big was your bed? And the more you can ask very specific, like, just be delighted with whatever comes to you and deeply curious about whatever is offered to you. Well, who was that again? Did the text story? Was he your cousin or was he just a friend? And no, my secondary story, someone mentions to my, and then we mentioned the squirrel goose. And I was like, well, what happened to Ruth? Ruth is a hugely big part of my book. And she was just, kind of a throwaway name once at one point. Whatever is given to you, take it and ask lots of questions and try to take it in without, how did you get impatient? If what you're getting isn't what you thought you were ready to get or what you sat down to get. Come to curiosity and gratitude. And a willingness to let, even if you never write the book, the fact that you get to hear from any elder, any detail of their life, and that they're willing to, to dredge it up, good, bad, or ugly, is that that's the whole gift, whether or not you make anything of it. And the more you can sort of comfortable with it, because I'll go to my grandmother, I feel like really impatient about, like, well, tell me more about this. I don't understand. The stories would get kind of fuzzier and less specific. Her job wasn't really to teach me about, like, how sure of its history went. She was kind of clear about, like, the years and things like that. That was me. I could do the hard research myself. But pinning down to things like the relationships, and the more specific I asked, and the more genuinely curious I was about whatever she had to give me, the more she would want to tell me, and also the more she would just remember. People have a lot more things come up for people in kind of a loose, dreamy way. And so just being with that, being willing to sort of go along with that, is you're most likely to evoke any information, I think. The more specific questions you ask too, about like, wait, take me through your house and want to draw the house for me with me. And those are really interesting. Oh, they're like, oh, I totally forgot. There was this other thing, that they hadn't even remembered to tell you.
So obviously, as you grew older, more mature, you could be trusted with more recent details.
Yeah.
But was there also the fact that you had published a book, or you were an author, you were capable of getting another book published, that she wanted her story told so the world would not forget? Was that part of it?
I remember after I published my first novel, which I dedicated to her, I remember saying, now I think you're ready to hear more. And she, she'd also, we're kind of brain savvy in our family. Unfortunately, I'm not, real through with the fact that we offer like, my grandparents raised to get the degree, and what did your professors say? So getting, published by Random House, my first book was like, aha, you have reached this level of, intellects that now I'm willing to bear more to you, for sure.
For that reason, so that it would.
I don't know, but I don't think she hoped, I thought it was delightful, the idea that I might turn her stories into an alternate, and she told me what name to use. But, she wasn't like, Nana was just delayed by me. And there was never any pressure, like, tell it this way, or make sure you tell this, or don't tell that. She was like, really, you won't use my stories? Well, let me tell you something then. And she would tell me he's doing this kind of terrible nuggets that she had told me before. But she never, like, went to give her story to, like, the whole, she never did that. Neither did my grandfather. They were both especially my grandfather, was very concerned with us casting and us not dying when the Holocaust hit him again, which is the way he always saw it. So when we were born with blue eyes like his, each one of us was born with blue eyes, he was thrilled. When I bought it was just because we had his blue eyes. And years later, I realized, no, it was because that's part of the way he passed was, that's how he lived in his parents' eyes. As he sort of hit in plain sight. So, I don't know if she ever believed. She seemed a little bit tickled that maybe other people would be interested in her stories, but she wasn't, she didn't have a lot of ego in it, or personal, yeah.
Well, it's not just.
That's not just, right.
Also, like, I don't want the world to forget.
I think she would have done, she was an excellent storyteller. She lived in LA, she lived in the Holocaust. She had every opportunity to share her story more widely, and she did. Yeah. Yeah. I wish she would have. I wish they had more recordings of her talking in that way. Yeah.
You're on a study where all this.
It's just been a real pleasure. I see there's delights to eat, and if anyone has a book, I'm happy to sign it as well. Thank you so much, Ariel, for coming.
Yes.
Yes, isn't that great?